11:30. Got time for another one? Here we go. Yeah. This is dated March of 1992, but actually it's the second one dated the same thing. So I take up my pen with a real rush of pleasure, and I hope a portion comes through to you as you read. In the past, from mid-October until the end of January, I didn't think of writing because of constant holiday season. My dad's birthday, Halloween, my folks' anniversary, Thanksgiving, Joshua's birthday, our anniversary, Christmas, New Year, the twins' birthdays. Usually it is deal with one, take a breath, celebrate the next, and so on until suddenly it's February and I'm looking around for something to do. Of course, my thoughts turn to you in this letter. And this year, however, this letter has already been on my mind off and on throughout the holiday season. Last December, when Joshua turned 14, I was struck by how tall, hairy, and deep-voiced he had become. I had a great desire to write down my advice for my children before they were not children anymore, and although they are growing as fast as children always have, it seemed urgent. I drafted 15 pages, mulled it over for a month, edited, rewrote, and gave Joshua his copy in mid-January. And all the time I was considering how to include it in this letter because it is from my heart and my best advice, and I wanted to share. But at the same time, the situation with Kuwait was heating up, and even though it was a busy holiday season, I was writing to various community leaders and organizations because it seemed so grave. I have strong feelings and long-term involvement in protesting our Middle East involvement, and I wrote and presented papers written and with intellectual conviction and documented references. And with each paper I thought of this letter and of you. Simultaneously, beginning in November and meeting weekly through the end of January, I was on a powerhouse committee convened to deal with the crisis of overcrowding in our local schools. Normally a community like this would never be called, a committee like this would never be called in the Christmas season, but the rapid settling of thousands of Hmong Vietnam War veterans, refugees, had raised a dire situation. I have intimate involvement with this condition as the first wave of immigrants arrived when my son started school, and I live in a poor immigrant neighborhood. I became the PTA president and school site council representative involved from the first year of this overcrowding crisis. Because education is important, this letter was in my thoughts at each of the meetings. All this was a jungle in my head when February rolled around and I actually sat down to write. Some months before I had checked out a book, The Trial of Socrates by I.F. Stone, out of the library. And although I had not read other works by Stone and had little regard for Socrates, because the book had been so highly praised in the paper and magazines and on the radio, I bought it. Still, it was a chance because it's hard to judge a book by someone else's recommendations. Also, after a long career as a reporter and a publisher of a Washington Insider newsletter, Stone had died at the same time this book was released. So it's possible that there had been so many and so favorable reviews because death is such a great publicity stunt. Anyway, I began to read with doubt and hope in equal measure, and in the first paragraph of the preface, where he explains how he came to write the book after illness forced him to abandon his primary career, he writes, I decided to embark on a study of freedom of thought, freedom to think and to speak. This project had its roots in a belief that no society is good, whatever its intentions, if men and women who live in it are not free to speak their minds. Wow, I was hooked. Freedoms are us, I thought, and I read on with such pleasure that I determined to buy my own copy of the book. Still, buying my own copy is an idea that I get perhaps in 1 of 10 books I read, but actually I rarely put out any real cash for a book, and I probably would not have in this case either, except I dropped the book in water and some of the pages swelled up, so I paid off the library and then more or less ironed the pages flat. In February, after this, my daughter Amy had minor surgery, and sometimes I had to be around in case of need. But if she didn't want anybody hovering too close, so I had to do things that kept me close but out of her hair. And since I had had such success in ironing The Trial of Socrates, I began to iron the wrinkled pages of my massive Webster's Unabridged Dictionary from the early 1950s. My dad had given it to his dad at Christmas one year, and at the time they were both in the newspaper business together, so it got a lot of use. But the paper got sold, my grandfather died, the dictionary went into storage for years, and when my dad gave it to me, he said that he felt I was finally settled enough to care for a 20-pound book, and he wanted me to have it because he felt it manifested the love of words that I shared with my grandfather. Well, I love that old man, and I love words, and now, settled on Liberty Street, I am glad to have it. But it's so big that it needs to stand on its own, which I don't have a stand, so it doesn't get much use. Because I open it so rarely, the fact that the first 200 pages or so had been wrinkled in storage was hardly an inconvenience. So I only set up the ironing board because of the conjunction of loving the book, having just ironed Stone's book, and my daughter's incapacity. Some of the pages had to be dampened, and the hot iron on damp old paper released a strong smell that might offend some, but was heady incense to me, and it whirled through my thoughts in this letter. In my head, I put the iron down, got coffee, and tried to order my thoughts, but they were spinning in a jumbled game of tag. Ironing the dictionary related to legacy and love and wanting to pass wisdom to my children was tangled with America's wicked worsening of things in the Middle East, related to education that does not teach that all people are equal with guaranteed rights, including freedom of thought and speech. Mental overload. I finished the coffee, went back to flattening my Webster's Unabridged Dictionary, and decided to let this letter percolate and get onto the paper when it will. Oddly, the first thing that came to mind when I began to write again was number 18 of Paul Rep's 101 Zen Stories, and this is it. A man crossing a field encountered a tiger. He fled, the tiger after him. Coming to a precipice, he caught hold of the roots of a wild vine and swung himself over the edge. The tiger sniffed at him from above. Trembling, the man looked down to where, far below, another tiger was waiting to eat him. Only the vine sustained him. Two mice, one white and one black, little by little started to gnaw away the vine. The man saw a luscious strawberry near him. Grasping the vine with one hand, he plucked a strawberry with the other. How sweet it tasted. That strawberry leads to a memory from my traveling days. Years ago, I'd spent 5 days and nights on the road and camped out on the strange and beautiful country of far-off southern Argentina. On the 6th morning, I was happy to be in the comfortable and warm seat of a bus on a paid fare across the Andes summits headed for lowland Chile. It had been lovely, but I was wrapped in anticipation of a warm bed and a warm shower after so many nights on the ground when the bus broke down in the high mountain pine forest. There's a gentle, steady snowfall, and it's cold, but where we are stopped is like the forest primeval with kindling aplenty, so passengers start a bonfire. We stand around it, stomping to keep warm, and it's almost pleasant, like the cosmos giving a final blessing to my hope to see the lake country and then get across the Andes ahead of winter. After about 4 hours waiting for a replacement part and making the repair, we board the bus, all warm and comfy again, and travel about 10 miles where a log protruding from a road bank knocks out the driver's windshield. The driver refused to go on, although many passengers beg him to. My heart cringes as he turns around and drives back to the mountain lake resort we had left that morning. We had spent all the money we had allotted for Argentina and all the money we had allotted for emergencies for our entire tour of South America, and the idea of another night on the cold mountain was not appealing. But when we hit the town, the bus company puts us up in a classy hotel with down comforters on the beds and hot water in the showers. Oh, sweet. That shower had a tang like that of strawberries that has flavored many showers I've had since with a faint tints of luscious fruit. When I flashed on the connection between the man dangling from between the tigers and me dangling between nights in Argentina, I wanted to write of it so skillfully that you would see the crab nebulae brilliant in the sky, sense the storm raging on the lake and battering the mountain called Thundermaker, feel the wind off the lake carrying the end of autumn and a hint of winter, bask in the warmth of the dancing bonfire flames amid gently falling flakes, see the dancing flowers around the deserted summer cottages. I wanted to do that, but I couldn't. What you see above is what was left after many pages had been written and thrown away in an attempt to tell you of the beyond description lake country of Argentina. I was struggling with that when Joel asked me to read what I was working on. He had never asked me in my letters before, so I was pumped up to do it. I started reading from the Zen parable, which he listened to, but then he lost interest and drifted away when I got to the account of my travels. Over dinner, Joel recounted the parable, and then he and his brother Joshua began to ridicule the parable. The strawberry tasted good, Dad? That's the end? I could understand using a strawberry to distract the tiger, but eat it? Why even tell that story, Dad? It's so dumb. Why, indeed. I didn't try and answer my kids. They're young and enjoying their sarcasm too much. But what I am thinking of is Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, and this is a quote. Vanity of vanity, all is vanity and hanging by a thread, with a tiger above and a tiger below. So eat and drink and enjoy the fruit of your labor with someone you love while you can all the days of your brief life. There is a rat gnawing the thread, so enjoy the strawberry while you dangle. This is a gift of God. Vanity of vanities, all right. I knew what I'd written didn't come close to the texture and flavor of Argentina, but I had a lot of paper and thought invested and would probably be still trying to polish it into something to close this letter with, but I got pulled in a different direction when a reporter came with the local newspaper on assignment, came to write about the First Amendment, particularly freedom of speech, and he asked to interview me. He told me that his angle was that school board meetings were a form of free speech, and the people he'd contacted at the school had recommended me as someone who spoke freely. By chance, part of this letter already written is about I.F. Stone and his admiration and mine for the freedom to think and to talk, so we spoke this morning. I don't know what will get written or printed in of the interview, but with no more thought of South America, I'll tell you the way I remember it. He asked me how I had come to my year-round school practice only in my area of town is unfair, and it would be fair and perhaps economically smart if practiced district-wide, so it should be considered. But it got no reaction when I brought it up, so I sharpened the language and said that prejudice seemed the only reason that would allow year-round schooling in my area, but refused to even discuss broadening the concept district-wide. I was told to trust them, that there was no prejudice involved, that it wouldn't be right for all the neighborhoods. I say it sounds like prejudice, and here again that year-round schools being concentrated where students are predominantly people of color has nothing to do with prejudice. Rather, it's just what happens, and is where the refugees bulge occurs, and yeah, right. I tell the reporter that I think that is why I was recommended to him regarding free speech, but it may not qualify because speech involves communication, and I was talking but I wasn't communicating. The people in education administration are sincere in their belief that there is no prejudice involved in their decisions, but although I am vocal and articulate enough to gain the reporter's visit, there is to this day no discussion of expanding year-round schooling, nor of any justification for forcing year-round school only in southeast Fresno. The reporter has children in the school district and agrees that prejudice may be involved, but he says that as my opinion has had no effect, why do I bother to speak out? Is it a bit of an ego trip, a twitting of the establishment? Well, maybe, I say, but I don't know my true motives for being confrontational. It is a question I pose to myself and in these letters. I doubt that I do it simply to get a rise because, as I said and have written to my wife, my parent, my siblings, my in-laws, and some co-workers, that you are individually responsible. If you can vote for the world as it is today, I do so with accompanying verifiable facts of evil done in our name, and I tell everyone to vote their conscience. I try to be entertaining, but I have never tried to sugarcoat the immorality and possible damnation. Beyond that, I have written to and spoken with civic leaders, politicians, journalists, educators, and religious professionals, telling them that they have a responsibility to vote their conscience, but as leaders, a further duty to speak out. I've done this over time with documentation verifying the charges laid, and then I return to the same people and topics in a year and then again after 3 years, thinking that I would sting consciousness into awareness. Yet, from my efforts, there has been scant response, negative or positive. So, because I elicit so little reaction, I don't think I'm doing it to twit people, or not only for that. The reporter asks if the poor response is frustrating, and I tell him no, because I have never expected much. For example, my school involvement was not done with an intention to set the system aright, but rather so that my children will think that I believe education is important. And in that same vein, just because I voice strong opinions doesn't mean that I think I know best. My contention that prejudice is a force in school district policy, that our covert activities are unconscionable, and that each of us is morally accountable for voting are minority opinions. And I'm not so righteous as to believe that I'm right, you're wrong, that's it. Besides all that, my personal life, which is inseparable from the current educational and political systems, is sweet. And so if nothing changes, I'm okay with it. And although I believe open, frank discussion between consenting adults can only be good, I've given up the hope of evincing dialogue too. It comes down to satisfying an urge like scratching an itch. A thought will seize my mind, circle, nagging, preventing any chance of that peace that surpasses all understanding. So I long to let it out, and I get a paper, and I do. The reporter asked if there was some fear or reluctance to speak bluntly in a public forum, and I tell him that perhaps a little when I first began, but it was simple stage fright, unrelated to what I was saying. This is America, land of the First Amendment and the free speech you are writing about. In many countries today, free speech can get dragged from your bed, and free speech can get you dragged from your bed and murdered, but it is unlikely to happen here. And if things worsen, even here, and right-wing death squads begin to haunt the night, then the fact that I'm a minor civil servant with no political affiliation, power base, wealth, or ambition means that people with a popular voice, that is to say, religious, union, political, educational leaders, and journalists, will be targeted and dragged from their beds before me. Nonetheless, there is some risk in voicing a minority opinion, and although going to Vegas holds little attraction for me, money's not really an interest in gambling state, gambling is a life spice for me, and speaking out puts your life on the line in a way. So, free speech is cheap entertainment. That wrapped up the interview. He left and I rushed to write this to you. His feature has yet to come out, so I have no idea what he heard or understood, but being interviewed as a representative of free speech is for me like the strawberry in the parable. Tastes good. In closing, I want you to read this poem by Emily Dickinson. It's untitled. The soul selects her society and then shuts the door. To her by divine majority present no more. Unmoved, she notes chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation choose one and then close the valves of her attention like stone. Finishing this letter, I read Emily's poem to Joel and Joshua, and they put it in the same category as the Zen story, laughing even as I write, but I say, Emily, you rock, girl. I had all this stuff circling in my head. It's easy to take stuff too seriously, but now it's out of my mind and on paper, and I'm going to work in the yard. With regard to things moral, you're on your own. With regard to freedom of speech, it is as satisfying as ripe strawberries. With regard to serious matters, I close the valves of my attention like stone. Sending this with peace and love from Liberty Street, Eric.